Well, welcome back to In the Box. This is a 5 Reasons Sports Show, the Fifth Line 5R crew. I'm your host, Alex Baumgartner. We've been bringing you content the last 2 years, and we're coming back for year three. And wow, what a way to start it off. The Florida Panthers have traded Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwint, and a first-round pick for Matthew Tkachuk, the 24-year-old 100-point scorer from the Calgary Flames. This was possibly one of the biggest trades in NHL history. Happened last night around 11 p.m. Funny, I was sleeping. My phone's blowing up. I read it. Matthew Tkachuk traded to the Florida Panthers. Jonathan Huberdeau, one of the best players in Florida Panthers franchise history, had the most points in Panthers history, is on his way to Calgary after spending his entire career in Sunrise. 2011 third overall pick. He's gone. Him and Weegar both had 1 year left on their contracts. Matthew Tkachuk, RFA, before he was traded to the Panthers, said he didn't want to re-sign in Calgary, gave a list of teams. Florida pulled the trigger. So one of the biggest trades in NHL history with 200-point scores for the previous season. They swapped places. This is going to change the makeup of the Florida Panthers. From as long as I can remember, Jonathan Huberdeau was one of the corner pieces of this franchise. With Alexander Barkov, Aaron Ekblad, Jonathan Huberdeau, they were the big three. Mackenzie Weegar is probably number 4 on that list. 2 of them are gone. They're heading over to the Scattle Dome in Calgary. Matthew Tkachuk, the American-born player, he's coming down south. So we're going to talk a lot about this trade and acquisition throughout the year because this is unbelievable. Tkachuk signs an extension because he was traded to Florida. 8 years, $76 million. That's $9.5 million. It's a lot of money. It came out today that salary is very similar to the Barkov contract, where it's $1 million base salary per season. The rest is signing bonus. What that means, the cap hit's still the same. It's still $9.5 million a year. And I think that's a pretty good deal for a 24-year-old who has scored 30-plus goals, 40-plus goals, hit 100 points this season, and he's turning 25 this year. That's a very good deal for the Panthers. They clear a little bit of cap in the future because Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau, obviously, as they go to Calgary, Huberdeau and Tkachuk would have similar contracts where Weegar would probably increase it $6 to $7 million. Florida's very cap tight. With this trade, they're going to have a lot more flexibility next offseason. Obviously, we know the Panthers could not retain guys like Claude Giroux, Ben Sherratt, Mason Marchment. They lost him to free agency. That's because of a $5.3 million contract on Patrick Hornqvist, $6.5 million plus dead cap between Keith Yandel and other buyouts. The Panthers had no cap flexibility. What they do is they trade Huberdeau, they trade Weegar. They don't have to extend them in the future. They have a 24-year-old who's going to be here till he's 32. Tkachuk's contract as an RFA comes in this year in his 24-year-old age. Where Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, their contracts would have started next offseason into the 23-24 year. So what that means is Huberdeau would have been 30, Weegar would have been 29 going on 30 on the first years of their deal. So obviously Jonathan Huberdeau has been one of the best point per game players in the NHL the last 3 years. Huberdeau's turning 30 when he's eligible for that new contract. What the Panthers did is they traded 2 guys who are older than the majority of the core of the team. Barkov, 26. I believe Reinhart was 26. Our friends over at Panther Pori did a really good job of putting together all the ages of the Panthers core. Weegar and Huberdeau, bar Bobrovsky, are the oldest guys. They move them. They get Matthew Tkachuk, who's 5 years younger than Huberdeau, about 5 years younger than Weegar. That's going to extend the window for this Panthers team. When you have a 24-year-old two-way forward who is as physical as anyone in this league. The only comparable I really have is Brad Marchand. Tom Wilson plays a very similar game where it's physicality with some offense, but we're talking about 100-point scores. That's what the Panthers get, and they get him in his prime. That's a very important thing to know. And I know the emotional aspect with Jonathan Huberdeau is there. He was the guy. He was the third pick. He was one of the franchise cornerstones. Bill Zito, after two pretty disappointing playoff series, you lose in the first round of Tampa. You go the next year with a stacked team, all the cards on the table, trade for Claude Giroux, trade for Ben Sherratt. You're bringing in pieces. They get swept in the second round. Something wasn't working. Zito pulled the trigger, traded 2 expiring contracts for a guy that wanted to come to Florida. So this trade's very interesting because we don't know how the two are Tkachuk's going to perform in Florida. We don't know how Huberdeau is going to perform in Calgary or Uyghur. We don't know if they're going to re-sign. Florida gave up a lot to get Matthew Tkachuk. They gave up 2 of the best players on the team, a first-round pick, and Cole Schwindt. And Schwindt's one of the better prospects in this team. And credit to Calgary for scouting Schwindt, because Schwindt wasn't a top pick. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't a Denisenko, a tip at a Samiskevich. They made sure they wanted this guy. They got a very good prospect from the Panthers system. They get 2 guys that either they could re-sign or try and flip at the deadline. There's been reports that the Flames have already gotten calls about Huberdeau. Now, Calgary lost Johnny Gaudreau. They lose Matthew Tkachuk. They lost Sam Bennett the season before. Those are 3 top picks that are gone and that didn't stay in Calgary. So the Flames, for a guy that wanted to leave, they got a really good haul. Really good. They got Jonathan Huberdeau, who was in Hart contention. They get Mackenzie Weegar, who was a Norris Trophy vote getter, for Matthew Tkachuk. So Trevling did a great job in the Flames front office to be able to get a guy or 2 guys that have very high trade value, even if they can't re-sign them. They can flip them at the deadline. They'll get more picks. Florida, they capitalize on 2 expiring contracts to get a guy that's going to be here for 8 years throughout the entirety of his prime. Matthew Tkachuk is going to be in Florida for the entirety of his prime. Obviously, barring trades, but, you give up a franchise player and the second to third best defenseman on the team for this guy, you're going to think he's going to be here for a while. And with the signing bonuses front-loaded, he's buyout proof. You can't buy him. You can't buy him out. He is lockout proof, so he's going to get paid during the lockout if there's a lockout. He's getting his tax discount, and Florida can't buy him out. He has the exact same $1 million salary as Alexander Barkov. And obviously the contract's $0.5 million per year less, but it's such a similar contract. And he gets the 8 years because Florida traded for his rights, obviously. So there's big changes coming in South Florida. Florida loses a defenseman. They lose one of the best players on their franchise. They get a young up-and-coming stud. When I say up-and-coming, I mean 24 years old, has had multiple really good years. Matthew Tkachuk, I said a couple weeks ago, for teams that, had assets, they can go for them. You should go for Matthew Tkachuk. I did not expect the Florida Panthers to do a blockbuster trade like this, where it was Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, plus. So what does this mean for the Panthers going forward? Alexander Barkov has the best winger he's ever had in his career, possibly on his line with Matthew Tkachuk. Tkachuk's a 2-way forward that plays a physical game but can drive the offense himself. I wouldn't say he's a shoot-first kind of guy, but when you can score 40 goals in a year, which he did last year, you're definitely looking to put the biscuit in the back of the net. Barkov, who's a playmaking guru, is going to find Tkachuk. And what is Barkov going to do now that his best friend, the guy that he's played with his entire career, is gone? You would think this lights a fire under him. If the Panthers did better in the playoffs this year, Huberdeau would not have been traded. If they made a deeper run, if Huberdeau and Barkov scored more points, Huberdeau would not have been moved. Zito didn't like what he saw. They capitalized on a guy who's in his prime, Now it's a different team. There's obviously benefits and cons to what just happened. The cons are you're breaking up Huberdeau, who's been there longer than anyone, right? He's a franchise leader. There's a very good possibility he gets his jersey retired in Florida, even after all of this. He's very close with Barkov. He's close with other guys on the team. Weegar as well. Weegar was the number 2 guy behind Ekblad. Ekblad went out 2 years in a row. Weegar and Forsling get to jump in. You trade both of those guys, they're in Calgary. You're bringing in a new guy. Now, the locker room aspect, they're professionals. Obviously, they're going to miss Huberdeau. However, the window is open for this team for longer than 2 to 3 years. If we think about Huberdeau signing an extension in Florida, 8 years, 10 plus million per, year 3, year 4 on that contract, he's 34, only halfway through the deal, making over $10 million or $10 million, whatever it was. It's a very high cap hit for a guy who was probably exiting his prime by then. 30, 31, those are probably the last 200-point years for Huberdeau in Florida. Tkachuk, though, the sky's the limit for this kid. He hit 100 points for the first time in his career last year. There's a very good chance he's going to hit that or near that again in Florida. The Panthers still have Sam Reinhart. They still have Barkov. They still have Bennett, Verhaeghe. Duclair is going to be back by the time the playoffs start. They still have Lundell. They didn't trade Lundell in this package, which is huge for Zito. Obviously, Schwindt's a big loss for the prospect pool, but Lundell's an established guy already. And the fact they didn't have to trade Lundell to get Tkachuk, huge for the Panthers. If Tkachuk can pan out, forget if Huberdeau and Weegar re-sign in Calgary. If Tkachuk can contribute enough to where they're going to make deeper playoff runs, they can pass the second round, they can win a game in the second round. This is a win for the Panthers. Huberdeau and Barkov, obviously, they were the 2 guys. Now, it's going to be Tkachuk and Barkov. You got a 26-year-old Barkov, 24-year-old Tkachuk. Their window is very similar. Whereas Huberdeau entering the contract year would have been 30. Weegar would have been 29 going on 30. Barkov would have been 27. That's a 3-year difference. You add a very young guy. He's kind of a unicorn, as I think Saravelli or Friedman said on Twitter. He can hit. He can score. He can do everything. He's going to be very big in the playoffs for the Panthers. They're not going to get bullied with Matthew Tkachuk on that team. Matthew Tkachuk will go toe-to-toe with anyone. Emotional aspects aside, I think both teams did a really good job trading in this acquisition. Tkachuk wanted out. He wasn't going to sign long-term in Calgary. You could RFA, tender him, whatever it is. He's not staying past this year. They get Huberdeau, who either you sign long-term or you flip for a lot of assets. You get Weegar, who either signs long-term or you can flip for assets. Ottawa was interested in Weegar. There's teams that are interested in Weegar. Obviously, teams are interested in Huberdeau. I think this is a very unique trade where both teams win. And until we see what happens in the season, no one really loses. We're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow about what Tkachuk will bring to this team, how he's going to add to their window, how the Panthers extended their window. But I think you guys heard enough of me talking today. So we're going to wrap this up. Make sure you stay tuned to the 5 Reasons Sports Twitter tomorrow, because we're going to have multiple articles coming out this week about Tkachuk. We just had a brand new article come out today from, let me pull it up right now. So Craig Davis just joined the team. He released an article today about the Panthers being all in on Tkachuk, Huberdeau leaving. So we welcome Craig to the team. He's a vet in the Florida game. So make sure you check that out on the 5 Reasons Sports Twitter. I will be obviously having an article out tomorrow. I'll post that on my Twitter, and it'll be on the Fifth Line 5R Twitter as well. We're just getting started here at the Fifth Line 5R crew. We're going to have more content coming next year. This is our 3rd year. We appreciate the support. You guys really showed out, whether it's YouTube, articles, Twitter. We're growing something special here, and hopefully the Panthers can continue the regular season success and advance that into the playoffs. They got a new coach. They got a new star. There's a lot of turnover coming in Florida, not just for this year. Get ready for next offseason as well. We got a lot of stuff cooking in Sunrise, and we're going to be along there for the ride. So follow us on Twitter at FifthLine5R. You can find my work at abaumgartner91. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel and follow the Twitter account. I'd like to thank our producer, Manny, who's been producing these shows for the last 2.5 years, going on year 3. Best in the game. So we'll see you guys next time on the first episode of year 3 of In the Box, Fifth Line 5R show presented by 5 Reasons Sports.